On the morning of November 9, 2020, Austria launched the largest police operation it had run since the end of the Second World War. 930 officers, 60 addresses raided across 4 provinces before most of the country had finished breakfast, 30 people detained, 25 million euros in cash seized, bank accounts frozen, 200 terabytes of documents carried out in boxes and hard drives. Behind it sat more than 20,000 hours of surveillance, built over years, signed off at the highest level of the Austrian state. The targets were not street cells or weapons caches. They were academics, charity directors, businessmen, and the former head of Austria's official Muslim representative body, a 78-year-old man. The operation had a name: Operation Luxor. Austria had decided to stop debating political Islam and start dismantling it. And then something happened that almost nobody outside Austria has ever heard about. The country's own courts turned around and took the whole thing apart, not on a technicality, not partially. Judges ruled that the raids had no legal basis at all. To understand how a European democracy launched its biggest police operation in 75 years against political Islam and then lost that fight to its own judiciary, you have to start somewhere that will surprise you. Because Austria was not late to this. Austria was first, more than a century first. In 1912, the Austro-Hungarian Empire passed a law recognizing Islam as an official religion of the state, not tolerated, not permitted, recognized with legal standing alongside Catholicism and Judaism. The reason was practical rather than idealistic. The empire had annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina and suddenly found itself governing hundreds of thousands of Muslim subjects, many of whom it wanted in its army. But whatever the motive, the result was extraordinary. Austrian Muslims got state-funded religious education in public schools, legal protection for their institutions, and a recognized religious community that could speak to the government as an equal. For most of the 20th century, European scholars pointed at the Austrian Islam law as the model everyone else should copy. Britain had no equivalent. France had the opposite. Austria had solved on paper what the rest of the continent would spend the next 100 years arguing about. Hold on to that, because everything after it is a story about a country dismantling its own reputation. By the 2010s, roughly 600,000 Muslims lived in Austria, around 7% of a country of 8.5 million. Around 450 Muslim organizations operated across the country, and the government had begun to notice something that made it deeply uncomfortable. A large share of those institutions were not really Austrian at all. Turkey, through its state religious authority, was funding and supplying imams. Gulf money flowed toward the harder Salafi end of the spectrum. Men were standing in Austrian pulpits, speaking to Austrian citizens, drawing salaries from foreign governments, and in many cases barely speaking German. Sebastian Kurz, then the integration minister, put it in a line that traveled across Europe. He said it would seem strange if the German chancellor sent Austria pastors who were employees of the German government. And in February 2015, Austria did what no other Western European country had done. It rewrote its own Islam law. This is the mechanism, and it is worth walking through carefully because half of Europe eventually borrowed pieces of it. The 2015 Islam Gazettes banned foreign funding for mosques and imams outright. It required imams to speak German. It required Muslim organizations to demonstrate a positive approach towards society and the state in order to keep their legal recognition. Mosques operating without proper legal status could be closed. The law also established a university program in Vienna to train imams domestically. And crucially, it was not purely restrictive. The same law guaranteed Muslims the right to take religious holidays, guaranteed halal food in hospitals, prisons, and the army, and guaranteed access to Muslim chaplains in the military and the courts. Kurz described the goal as an Islam of European character. The criticism was immediate and specific. The foreign funding ban applied to Islam and not to the Catholic or Jewish communities, which kept receiving money from abroad without restriction. Turkey's top cleric called the law a 100-year regression. ATİB, the Turkish-linked umbrella group, argued it violated both the Austrian constitution and the European Convention on Human Rights. And their counterargument is one you have to sit with, because it recurs in every country that tries this. Austria at that point had suffered almost no jihadist violence. Critics asked what exactly was being prevented, and whether a state that singles out one religion for financial supervision is practicing neutrality or performing it. Austria's answer was to start enforcing. In June 2018, Chancellor Kurz announced that 7 mosques would be closed and around 40 Turkish-funded imams would have their residence permits reviewed or revoked. The legal basis was the 2015 law, specifically the foreign funding clause. Investigators had found that Turkish money was reaching imams in Austria, routed through a personnel company in Belgium. Kurz said parallel societies, political Islam and radical tendencies had no place in the country. It was the first time the Islam law had been used as a weapon rather than a framework, and it worked exactly as designed. Then, in July 2020, Austria built an institution to run the argument permanently, the Documentation Center for Political Islam. The idea had come from the far-right Freedom Party 2 years earlier. Its official name, negotiated down by the Greens, was the Austrian Fund for the Documentation of Religiously Motivated Political Extremism, with the words Political Islam in brackets at the end. Everyone called it what it was. Annual budget of around €500,000, structured as a fund, which put it outside normal parliamentary oversight. Its purpose was to assess which Muslim organizations Austrian public authorities could work with and which they could not. The state had created a body to sort a religion's institutions into acceptable and unacceptable. No equivalent existed for any other faith in Austria, but all of this was still administrative. Registers, closures, permits, paperwork. What turned Austria from a regulator into something else took 9 minutes on a warm autumn evening in Vienna. On November 2, 2020, a few hours before the country entered a COVID lockdown, a 20-year-old man named Kujtim Feyzulay walked into Vienna's Old City carrying an assault rifle, a handgun, a machete, and a fake explosive vest. He moved through the nightlife district around Schwedenplatz, past the city's main synagogue, firing at people sitting outside bars and restaurants on what many had assumed would be their last night out for months. He killed 4 people and wounded 23. Police shot him dead 9 minutes after the first shot. The Islamic State claimed him within a day, and then the details came out, and they were devastating for the Austrian state. Feyzulay was born in Austria. He had already been convicted, in April 2019, of trying to travel to Syria to join the Islamic State. He was sentenced to 22 months. He was released early on parole in December of the same year. He had been through a de-radicalization program. It had failed. Foreign intelligence services had flagged him after he traveled to Slovakia and tried to buy ammunition. The warning reached Austria. It did not produce action in time. A subsequent inquiry into the failure was blunt about where the fault sat, and it did not sit with Austrian Muslims. It sat with an intelligence service that had been reorganized into dysfunction and had lost a file it was already holding. Austria's Interior Ministry, which was about to launch the largest security operation in the country's post-war history, had been told about this specific man and had not stopped him. Hold that thought, because it explains the political pressure behind everything that came next. A government that has just failed at surveillance has an overwhelming incentive to be seen doing something enormous, quickly, and in public. 7 days later, Operation Luxor began. And the date has never stopped being an argument in Austria. The raids went in on November 9th, the anniversary of Kristallnacht, the 1938 pogrom in which Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues were attacked and thousands of Jews arrested across the Reich, Austria included. Officials insisted the date was operational coincidence, and there is no evidence it was chosen deliberately. But in a country that has spent 80 years building its identity around never again doing this to a religious minority, sending 930 officers into the homes of Muslim families on that specific morning was, at minimum, an extraordinary failure to think. The timing was not framed as retaliation, and officially it was not, because the investigation had been running for years before the attack. But the political context was unmistakable. 930 officers moved on 60 addresses across Vienna, Graz, Lower Austria, and Carinthia. The charges under investigation were terrorist organization membership, terrorist financing, organized crime, and money laundering, with alleged links to Hamas and to the Muslim Brotherhood. Cash was seized. Homes were searched with children present, Assets were frozen, which in practice meant people could not pay rent or wages while never having been charged with anything. Among the targets was Anas Shakfe, the former president of the Islamic religious community of Austria, the umbrella body representing more than 250 Muslim associations, and a man who had spent his career as the state's chosen interlocutor with Austrian Islam. Another was Farid Hafez, a political scientist who published an annual report on Islamophobia in Europe. The scale was genuinely unprecedented. And so was the ambition. Austria was not prosecuting a plot. It was attempting to prove in court that a political movement existed inside its borders, and that belonging to it was itself a crime. If you want more of these stories, the ones where the official version and the court record do not match, subscribe to Fall of Nations. Because what happened to Operation Luxor over the following 4 years is the part that almost never gets reported, and it changes everything you have just heard. The first problem was language. Investigators had seized around 200 terabytes of material, most of it in Arabic. An internal document leaked to the newspaper Der Standard estimated that with the number of translators assigned to the case, translating all of it into German would take 21 years. 21 years. The evidence that was supposed to prove a conspiracy could not physically be read within the lifetime of the investigation. The second problem was the law itself. Austrian prosecutors had built much of their case on affiliation with the Muslim Brotherhood. But the Muslim Brotherhood is not a prescribed terrorist organization in Austria. It never has been. Courts pointed this out repeatedly, and the point is simple enough that it should have been obvious before 930 officers were deployed. You cannot charge someone with belonging to a banned organization that has not been banned. Then the rulings came. In the summer of 2021, the higher regional court in Graz examined 9 separate appeals brought by people whose homes and businesses had been raided. It upheld every single one. The court found the raids unlawful. It found that the surveillance of an association's premises by audio and video had no legal basis, and ordered the resulting recordings destroyed. It found that the evidence underpinning the operation was insufficient. Judges ordered the investigation into Anas Shakfe dropped entirely, ruling that what prosecutors had against a 78-year-old former religious leader did not meet the threshold. Over the following years, terrorism charges were dropped against roughly 30 of the 70 people originally in the file. Not one of the 30 people detained on that November morning was convicted of the terrorism offenses the operation was built around. The largest police operation in post-war Austrian history produced, in the end, no terrorism convictions at all. And the city of Vienna later publicly honored Anas Shakfe, the man its own federal government had treated as a suspect. Farid Hafez described what those years actually cost: a 9-hour search of his home, laptops and phones taken, bank accounts frozen. He had been a regular commentator published across the Austrian press, left and right. Then rumors spread that he was a Brotherhood sleeper agent. The charges were eventually dropped. His professional life in Austria did not recover, and he ended up teaching in the United States. One court document justifying the continued investigation argued that his work on the Islamophobia report was itself suspicious, because promoting the concept of Islamophobia could discourage critical engagement with Islam. Read that again. A man was under terrorism investigation partly because he documented anti-Muslim discrimination. That sentence is in the record, and it is the single strongest argument the critics of this entire strategy have ever been handed. Neither the Interior Minister of the time, Karl Nehammer, who later became Chancellor, nor the Justice Minister, Alma Zadic, accepted responsibility for the collapse. Here is where an honest account has to hold two things at once, because this is not a story with clean heroes. The failure of Operation Luxor does not prove the underlying concern was invented. Austria genuinely had a jihadist milieu, documented since the 1990s, that produced roughly 300 foreign fighters and produced Kujtim Feyzullah. 4 people genuinely died at Schwedenplatz. Turkish state funding of Austrian mosques genuinely happened and was genuinely a sovereignty problem. What Luxor proved is narrower and more uncomfortable. A European state can be completely correct that a problem exists and completely unable to convert that conviction into evidence a judge will accept. And when a state swings the largest hammer it owns and misses, it does not go back to zero. It goes backwards because it has just manufactured the exact grievance the extremists were already selling. and Austria did not pause. In May 2021, while the courts were preparing the rulings that would gut the operation, the government launched something else. Integration Minister Suzanne Raab unveiled the National Map of Islam, an interactive website built with the University of Vienna and the newly created Documentation Center for Political Islam. The map listed the names, addresses, and foreign links of more than 620 mosques, associations, and officials across the country. Raab said the aim was to fight political ideologies, not religion, and that the map was not intended to place Muslims under general suspicion. Within days, unofficial signs appeared on streets in Vienna reading, in effect, "Warning, Political Islam in your area," with the map's web address printed underneath. Police removed them. People whose home addresses appeared on the map reported strangers standing outside their houses. The Islamic religious community said the map demonstrated an intent to stigmatize all Muslims as a potential danger, and the sharpest criticism came from inside the government itself. The Greens, the junior coalition partner, said they had not been consulted and that the project mixed Muslims with Islamists, which was the opposite of integration policy. A governing party's own partner had accused it of collapsing the exact distinction the whole strategy depended on. That distinction is the entire ballgame. Every European government running this playbook says the same sentence. We are not acting against a religion. Germany says it when it dissolves an organization. France says it when it closes a prayer hall. Austria said it when it unveiled the map. The sentence describes a real legal boundary. Organizations can be banned. Faiths cannot. But the sentence only holds if the practice holds. And a map of 620 Muslim institutions published by a state body is not a map of a political movement. It is a map of a religion. The moment it went online, people who had never had a political thought in their lives found their community center listed on a government website under a heading about extremism. The contrast with the neighbors explains a lot. Germany goes after named organizations using a specific constitutional doctrine, bans them, seizes assets, and then loudly declares the ban does not touch the faith. France passed a sweeping separatism law and built an administrative machine of inspections and closures. Austria did something different from both. It reached for criminal terrorism law, the heaviest instrument any legal system owns, and aimed it at an ideological affiliation rather than at a prescribed organization or a specific plot. Germany's model survives contact with judges because it targets structures. Austria's did not, because it targeted a category. Which brings this story to the present and to the part that suggests Austria has not learned the lesson its courts tried to teach it. In 2019, Austria banned headscarves for girls under 10 in primary schools. In 2020, the Constitutional Court struck that ban down, ruling that it discriminated against a single religion and violated the state's duty of religious neutrality. It was, in effect, the same verdict the Graz court would deliver about Operation Luxor, arriving from a different direction. Then, on December 11, 2025, the Austrian parliament passed a new headscarf ban, this time for all girls under 14 in public and private schools alike, including Islamic faith schools. Parents face fines from 150 to 800 euros for repeat non-compliance. The government estimates it affects up to 12,000 children. It takes full effect with the school year beginning in September 2026. Integration Minister Claudia Plakholm called the headscarf on a minor a symbol of oppression. The far-right Freedom Party, which had proposed going further and applying it to staff as well, backed it. The Greens were the only party to vote against. And constitutional lawyers, including Heinz Meyer, immediately raised the same objection the court accepted in 2020, that a law written to target one religion's garment specifically will struggle to survive review. The government says it has done its best to make this version constitutional. Nobody yet knows whether it has. So what did Austria actually achieve? It got there first in 1912, recognizing Islam as a religion of the state. It got there first again in 2015, building the legal machinery for cutting foreign money out of European mosques, machinery France would later echo when it ended its own arrangement of state-sponsored imams. Those are real accomplishments and other countries copied them. But when Austria escalated from regulating institutions to criminalizing an affiliation, it hit a wall its own constitution had built. It hit it hard enough that the largest police operation in 75 years ended with no terrorism convictions, a former religious leader publicly honored by the capital city, an academic driven out of the country, and a Muslim population that now, reasonably, does not believe the government when it says it is only after the extremists. Austria proved a democracy can identify political Islam. It has not proved a democracy can prosecute it as a category and win. So we want to hear from you. Was Operation Luxor a legitimate attempt to confront a real network that simply failed on evidence and translation capacity, the kind of failure any hard case risks? Or was it exactly what the courts effectively said it was, a political operation dressed as a counter-terrorism case, aimed at a community rather than a crime? And did the courts save Austria from itself? Tell us in the comments, we read them. And if you want the stories underneath the headlines, the slow legal machinery of how states defend themselves and how that machinery goes wrong, subscribe to Fall of Nations. Because the same question now sits in front of a constitutional court, and the answer arrives before the next school year begins.